Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass the bill S 3167.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 3167, an act to amend Title 13 of the United States Code to provide for a 5-year term of office for the Director of the Census and to provide for the authority and duties of the Director and Deputy Director of the Census and for other purposes. Pursuant
to the rule, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, and the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for recognizing me, and I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
I now yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the Census Oversight, Efficiency, and Management Reform Act, important bipartisan legislation that I introduced with my colleague, Congressman Charles Dent. Senators Carper and Coburn, in a bipartisan way, introduced the companion bill in the Senate that recently passed the Senate unanimously, 100 votes in favor, and is now before us today. This is a strong bill with no cost to American taxpayers, and it will help ensure a better census for 2020 and beyond. It's bipartisan, it's good government, it's scientific independence, and it's good management. This important reform ensures consistent professional management of this major scientific agency and minimizes political interference of its vital constitutional mission. I am grateful to Senators Carper and Coburn for their bipartisan leadership on this issue in the Senate. Now we in the House must commit to forward thinking to avoid problems in the run-up to the 2020 census. Our country owes a great deal to James Madison and Thomas Jefferson for handing down the innovation of a census, whose goal is to ensure fair political representation. If we want to attract future census leaders in their mold, we must give the Census Bureau the professional independence called for in this bill. This bill is a way of saying to the American public that we honor the intent of the framers and we acknowledge the incredible participation of the public earlier this year to make the 2010 census a success. Madam Speaker, all 7 living former census directors who served Republican and Democratic presidents support this bill. Vincent P. Baraba, who worked for Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter. John G. Keene, who worked for President Reagan. Barbara Everett Bryant, who worked for the first President Bush. Martha Ritchie and Kenneth Pruitt, who worked for President Clinton. Charles Lewis Kincannon and Stephen H. Murdoch, who worked for George W. Bush. The former directors' support and advocacy on behalf of this bill, and they testified at congressional hearings, met with congressional leaders on this bill, and their participation underscores the importance of the reforms needed to ensure that the Census Bureau is able to best perform its constitutional mandate of providing a fair and accurate census count. I worked with Senators Carper and Coburn and my colleague Congressman Dent to develop this bill based on the experiences of the 7 former bipartisan census directors and what they thought we need to overcome the challenges which plagued each of the last four censuses in 1980, 1990, 2000, and in the planning for 2010 census. This bill enjoys bipartisan support across the scientific, social, and political groups, supported in a bipartisan way, from the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, representing over 200 civil rights organizations, to NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, to a host of scientific organizations, including the American Statistical Association. With Senator Carper's and Senator Coburn's bipartisan leadership in the Senate, it passed unanimously. What this bill would do is give the director the independence to report directly to the Secretary of Commerce, will make the director of the Census Bureau a presidential term appointment of 5 years, with the 10-year census planning cycle split into 2 5-year phases, planning and implementation. Further, it strengthens overall transparency and oversight of census management, which is a very good thing. This legislation would allow the Census Director to report to Congress and the Commerce Secretary directly on the needs at Census to help prevent challenges such as the failure to develop handheld computer technology for the 2010 census, and to have the power to say to Congress when he or she disagrees with an administration position on the census. After nearly 2 years of consideration and debate on the ideas in this bill in both the House and the Senate, and now at the 11th hour and 59th minute after the Senate approves it unanimously, the Commerce Department last night sent over their concerns. The Secretary supports the 5-year term for the Census Director, but seeks some changes to the bill's requirement that the Census Director be permitted to respond completely to Congress in testimony, and to the requirement that the highest levels of management at Commerce take responsibility for oversight of census management. Of course, this is precisely what we in Congress seek to change. These two provisions are about accountability and transparency. We in Congress are insisting that we finally end the musical chairs of census management we witnessed over the past several decades, and that when we ask questions, we actually get the answers. We must allow the career professionals at the census to be able to tell us what is on their mind. This bill will remove barriers that prevented Congress from knowing the full story in planning for 2010, which put the census at risk before Congress acted to fully fund a new design. I am confident this bill will ensure Congress will get the information we deserve to get us a fairly and fully funded census, no matter who occupies the White House in 2020. There are some who may not like this bill or have additional ideas for reform, but I deeply believe we can build on this legislation and continue to work together in a bipartisan way to ensure a fair and accurate full census count. There is no reason we cannot move forward on this issue today and enact these common sense reforms now. The next census will occur during a presidential election, which runs the risk of disrupting the operation. We must act now to ensure we can get a professional manager like Dr. Groves at Census long before 2020. We need to bring focus, transparency, and accountability to the process of planning and implementing the census. There is too much at stake for our constitutional government, for the fair distribution of over $400 billion in federal funds, and for the basic trust in our statistical system to do anything less than enact this bill. With the Senate action, now is the time to get this bill to the President. We can show the American public Congress can work together in a bipartisan fashion to reform government and get results. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from New York reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And today I rise in strong opposition of Senate Bill 3167. In the last 2 years, I've served as the ranking member of the Census Subcommittee here in the House. We've had no legislative hearing, no markup, no substantive discussions about the contents of this legislation. And here we are at the last hour of a lame duck Congress, and they're trying to pass a piece of legislation that hasn't had a honest-to-goodness legislative hearing or a markup. Well, I guess that's what we've seen over the last 24 months out of this Congress, is a disregard for the legislative process. I don't think it's responsible for us to pass a major piece of legislation like this, and it does have a major impact. And I certainly appreciate my colleague submitting ideas such as this to improve the census, but I don't think this is the right approach. And to that end, I ask unanimous consent to submit to for the record a letter from the Department of Commerce signed by Secretary Gary Locke, dated December 13th, stating his opposition to components of this legislation.
Without objection.
Thank you. I think it's important that we shouldn't reward the Census Bureau for a repeated history of cost overruns and mishaps. These suggest that the Bureau needs more, not less, oversight. Senate Bill 3167 would grant greater autonomy to the Census Director. The bill would have the Director bypass the Commerce Undersecretary for Economic and Statistics Administration, ESA, in favor of a direct report to the Commerce Secretary. Each Commerce Secretary has opposed this proposal. In fact, the current Commerce Secretary has 16 direct reports, and so this further puts in place a process that I don't think is sustainable for this Commerce Secretary or future Commerce Secretaries. Yesterday, the current Commerce Secretary, Gary Locke, wrote a letter to Congress stating the Department, quote, strongly opposes the provisions of this bill enabling the Census Bureau Director to submit legislative recommendations or testimony to Congress without supervisory review. This letter also expresses concern about the provisions of the bill that would require the Director of the Census Bureau to report directly to the Secretary of Commerce. With regard to these views, it is worth pointing out that it is the Commerce Secretary himself who is granted the statutory authority to carry out the decennial census. The Census Bureau will have less oversight if it reports directly to the Secretary, as I've stated before, because the Secretary has 16 direct reports. The Census Director currently reports to the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs, who heads ESA. It is the role of ESA to coordinate economic data, some of which is provided to the Census Bureau's Economic Directorate. Granting the Census Bureau autonomy from ESA will hinder the coordination of economic data. And certainly we are a world leader in terms of our regard for economic data. The Census Bureau wants to operate as independently as possible. That certainly is understandable. But it's also important to recognize a history of cost overruns that the Bureau has had under Democrat and Republican administrations. And the GAO has put the 2010 census in its high-risk list due to concerns of mismanagement within the Census Bureau. And again, that was a bipartisan problem. Congress should not reward fiscal irresponsibility by granting additional autonomy. Madam Speaker, this bill does not establish accountability. It does not require the Census Bureau to have an inspector general, which I think would be proper. It does not establish fiscal constraints. It doesn't even provide guidelines on the questions and surveys that it can ask the American people. And it doesn't require the Bureau to produce alternative methods of procuring statistical data, such as partnerships with universities and the private sector, which I think is necessary and proper in this time that we're in. Madam Speaker, consideration of this bill is premature. The 2010 census results will be released 1 week from today. The Bureau just announced that yesterday. But crucial information concerning the statistical confidence level of the data will not be released until early next year. Again, this bill is premature. I certainly appreciate my colleagues' interest in this, but I think it is better handled in the next Congress, where we can actually have an honest goodness, I don't know, legislative hearing perhaps, maybe even a markup of a bill, and actually get some input from both sides. Just because the Senate passed it doesn't mean the House should rubber stamp it by any means. But I do think we should have serious consideration of this bill and do it under the light of day, not at the 11th hour of a dying Congress. So that's my view, and I think that's the view of many colleagues on my side of the aisle as well, and I retain the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the gentleman's statements, and as he knows, this is an issue that many of us on a bipartisan way have worked on for many years. As you know, my original bill did create an independent office of the census, which by definition would have had an IG, but at the protest of some of my colleagues and some in the Commerce Department, we kept it in the Commerce Department, but with independence so that the Census Director could speak honesty and truth. I don't think any of us want to keep someone from not testifying in an honest and truthful way and having their words possibly changed by someone else. Now, I would like unanimous consent to place in the record a series of editorials in support of this bill, USA Today and many others. There has been hearings on it, including one in the Joint Economic Committee, where 7 former census directors, in a bipartisan way, testified in support of this bill. I ask unanimous consent to place into the record the testimony of Dr. Bryant, a Republican census director, and other Republican census directors, along with Dr. Pruitt and others, their testimony on how we can get a more reliable, transparent, usable census for accuracy for the American people. I now would like to recognize a very outstanding
Without objection.
a woman on the committee, and Congresswoman Norton, for as much time as she may consume.
The gentlelady from Washington, D.C. is recognized.
I want to thank the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, for her initiative in seeing a problem and seeing to it that we dealt with this problem while we've got a hand on it. Actually, it's very timely. The census is about to come out for the past 10 years in December the 30th, and I can tell you, Madam Speaker, as a member of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over the census, that the census has been controversial throughout my service in the Congress. Time and again we've seen before this committee, but the census should never be controversial. Neither should a bill that fixes much of what is wrong with the census in a systemic way and handily pass the other body, which doesn't pass much these days. When it comes to the constitutionally required census, there really is only one way to act, and that is preventively. And I just want to say to the House that the handwriting is on the proverbial congressional wall. I mean, we were shocked that only a couple of years ago there was a serious and very expensive design change in the census, so close to when the census itself was wrapping up. Now, somebody should have seen this coming, certainly before our committee found it out and was left with no choice. Remember, this is the constitutionally required census. No choice but to accept the added cost. If my friends on the other side are interested in reducing costs, the way to begin is with this bill, which it seems to me ought to be a consensus bill right now. The crisis has been a part of every census in modern times. Yet most of what Congress does, if you think about it, is not required. Our appropriation bills, the defense, but the census is constitutionally required. it should not be buried. The census and those who are responsible for the census should not be buried in an agency bureaucracy. Direct reporting to the Secretary, not taking the Census Bureau from outside of the jurisdiction of the Secretary, but direct reporting to the Secretary of Commerce, and complete independence with a 5-year term is what this bill is after. The bill also contains urgently needed management reforms. It should be a top priority of this Congress as it faces a new census to go home and be able to tell people we have acted this time ahead of the next census to make that census less controversial than censuses, since the decennial census has been in the lifetime of all of us. The care that has gone into this bill before our subcommittee and committee should be enough to say to the Congress this afternoon, the time has come to fix the decennial census once and for all. I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I rise in opposition to this legislation. Certainly appreciate the sponsors' thoughtfulness in creating it, but I think there are a number of provisions that do cause problems. And I agree with the Democrat Secretary of Commerce, the current Secretary of Commerce, with his opposition to large provisions within it. In order to thoughtfully legislate on the decennial census, I think we need to have a hearing. And I think we need to have a markup. And I think we can hash this thing out. And I'm willing to work with my colleague from New York to make that happen in the next Congress. Because I do think she comes from a sincere place with this legislation. Unfortunately, it's a piece of flawed legislation. I'll give you one example. The Census Director will report directly to the Secretary of Commerce. Again, that Census Director will be one of 17 individuals with a direct report to the Secretary of Commerce. However, the Secretary of Commerce is not able to fire the Census Director. So if he's a direct report, he or she is a direct report to the Commerce Secretary, shouldn't the Commerce Secretary have the ability to fire that person if they're incompetent or inept, rather than just letting them serve a 5-year term? That's one provision within the legislation that I think is troublesome. Additionally, as the sponsor mentioned, there is no Inspector General. And with a multi-billion-dollar census, I think it's important that we have IGs that actually have the power to oversee a program, and a program that's so large and so expensive. This census has a $3 billion cost overrun over its life cycle. Now, the individuals responsible for that weren't held accountable. But that $3 billion, rather than rewarding the Bureau for having a cost overrun of that size by giving them independence and autonomy right now, I think we need to have some thoughtful consideration of how to ensure that we don't have future cost overruns like that. And with that, I retain the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves the balance of his time. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
I grant myself as much time as I may consume. I thank the gentleman for his concern and his thoughtful statements, and if the gentleman is so determined for a markup, there is one bill that the Republican leadership has told us they must have, and that's the tax bill. Yet there's been no markup on that tax bill or a hearing on that tax bill. And there have been hearings and discussions on this, and I have testimonies from numerous Republican census directors supporting it. Now, as the gentleman knows, and we changed the bill in response to the gentleman's concerns and others, we did have it as an independent agency with an independent IG. We folded it back into Commerce at your suggestion and others. And as you know, Commerce Department has an IG. They have their own IG. And if the gentleman in the next Congress would like to sponsor an amendment to add another IG at Commerce that looks totally at the Census Bureau, then I would certainly support the gentleman. Now, the gentleman has written an op-ed which I found very interesting, and I appreciate your op-ed that appeared in Politico. And you called for many things in this bill: transparency, independent voice, accountability. And I repeat, because I know cost is an important factor now, this will cost no additional money to the taxpayer, not one additional cent. And I would like to join my good friend and colleague in the spirit of bipartisanship and the dedication of getting an accurate census for the American people, that we pass this bill. And what the gentleman would like to add to it in the next Congress, and the gentleman's party is in charge, and you will have the votes to add whatever you'd like next year. And I certainly would like to work with you in a bipartisan way to add the gentleman's concerns. But there's absolutely no reason not to act on this when 7 former census directors have come out strongly for it, including every Republican census director under former President Nixon, under former President Ford, under former President Reagan, and George Bush 41 and 43, George Bush Jr., GW, and his father. So all of their census directors have come out in support of it. I would also like to place into the record, if I could have unanimous consent, the National Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and they represent 200 different civil rights organizations, all in support of this bill. The National Association of Latina Elected and Appointed Officials, their letter in support of the bill. The Population Association of America and the Association of Population Centers, their letter of support for the bill. The American Association for Public Opinion Research, their statement in support of the bill. The American Planning Association, their statement in support of the bill. The American Statistical Association, that are dedicated to accurate numbers, their strong support of accuracy in this bill. The Consortium of Social Science Associations, their support. The Latino Census Network, their strong support. The Mid-Region Council of Governments, their strong letter of support. And the National Institute for Latino Policy, their letter of support. The Southeast Michigan Census Council, their support of the bill, and the Southern Demographic Association, their support of the bill. So as my good friend and colleague knows, that there is strong support for this bill. Many allege that the Commerce's opposition is just a turf battle. Well, the census is too important for a turf battle. I would support the gentleman's amendment to have an independent extra IG. If he wants 2 IGs on the Census Bureau, I'd support it, or 3 or 4 or 5. I would support the gentleman's extra oversight of what the Census Bureau is doing. But mainly we want them to be given the tools to get the job done. That is what this bill does. Madam Speaker, I have no additional speakers. A number of members have indicated because of the weather they are late in getting here. They will be putting their statements of support into the record. I reserve the balance of my time and yield back to you.
The gentlelady reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to submit a record for my submit a statement to the record from my colleague Charlie Dent from Pennsylvania.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, just to address my colleague's comments about the opinion she imputed to me about this legislation and the way she changed the legislation to more meet with my opinion, those, Madam Speaker, were not my opinions. We've actually not had discussions about this legislation. My colleague and I from New York have not. So just to be very clear, those opinions were someone else's, not mine. Additionally, it's kind of interesting to throw in the tax debate regarding a piece of legislation about the census. I'm not going to take the bait. It's fine. We'll have a vote on that, or we won't have the vote on that this Congress, depending on what the Speaker thinks. But I certainly I certainly understand the concern about not having hearings and not having markups. But I would say to my colleague from New York that it is her party that is in charge of both the House and the Senate, and they had every opportunity to schedule a hearing on this piece of legislation. They had every opportunity to schedule a markup on this piece of legislation, and they didn't. So clearly, it is a problem not with my party, but it is a problem with my colleague from New York's party about getting that scheduled. Madam Speaker, I do have serious concerns, and I think legitimate concerns, and I understand how many folks would operate in Congress, which is you take a pledge that we'll fix it later, and that later never happens. So what I would say to my colleague from New York is in the next Congress, I would be very happy to work with her to pass a reasonable piece of legislation that I think structurally will look different than this, but I think will take on some of the concerns that she has about the Census Bureau. I'm truly concerned about making sure that our statistical agencies are independent from political influence, like this president tried to have at the beginning of his term in office by having the census director report directly to then Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel. We came out opposed to that. It was my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that wanted that. We came out opposed to statistical manipulation of the outcome of the census, which some in the other party were very much in favor of. It is true that we have political disagreements between Republicans and Democrats, but I think we all want to have a fair and accurate census. I also want to have a census that's cheaper in the future than it has been in the past. We've had a cost overrun of $3 billion. And as I would mention to my colleague from New York, the Department of Commerce, their whole budget is just shy of $9 billion annually. They had a $3 billion cost overrun within just the census. So that is an enormous sum, and I think it's worthy of having an inspector general to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So that is my concern, and with that, I retain the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to place in the record the statement of the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Congressman Ed Towns.
Without objection.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman's concerns, but we should pass this bill, and in the new Congress, you could add your amendments or your ideas to the underlying bill. This is a strong bill with no cost to American taxpayers, no increased cost, and it will help ensure a better census for 2010. As I said, it has very strong bipartisan support, particularly the 7 living former census directors who served Republican and Democratic presidents. They support this bill. They testified before Congress that this bill would make a stronger, more accountable, transparent census. The former directors' support and advocacy on behalf of this bill, I believe, underscores the importance of the reforms needed to ensure that the Census Bureau is able to best perform its constitutional mandate of providing a fair and accurate census account. And again, I want to underscore, how many times have we seen a bill come over with 100 senators in support of it? Totally unanimous, totally bipartisan. And I'm confident that this bill will ensure that Congress will get the information that we need and deserve to get us a fairly and fully funded census, no matter who occupies the White House, that it's independent and would respond. Madam, what did she say? Oh, my time is up, and I was just getting started. But in other words, this is a very important bill. I would like to place in the record all of those who have endorsed it, and I urge a bipartisan, strong vote in support of this bill. Thank you.
Without objection, the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm sorry my colleagues used up her time, but I'm going to close in saying that anyone that wants an accountable Census Bureau will oppose this bill. Instead of saying we want an independent bureau that is not accountable, I think we're saying we want an independent bureau that is accountable, and that's why I'm going to oppose this bill. And I ask my colleagues, those that want fiscal sanity, those that want proper oversight of the census, those that want reasonable legislating that actually means that we have a hearing and a markup, to vote no on this bill. I'd also mention to my colleague from New York that her legislation that we're discussing here today got just about as many votes as that tax deal that she opposes. So, you can take this for all you want on what the Senate does, but I think us here in the House, the census affects every member of the House, all of our constituents, our statistical reporting agencies, and our economic bureaus as well. We want to make sure we get this legislation right, and it is highly flawed as it currently is constructed, and it will mean further cost overruns going forward. And with that, I urge my colleagues to vote no and to reject this legislation. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 3167? Those in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection.
Madam Speaker, ask for the yeas and nays.
For what purpose?
Madam Speaker, ask the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.